Imagine a place where the air is so thick with the smell of rusted iron, male sweat, and concentrated testosterone that you could literally cut it with a knife. A place where every square inch is packed with mountains of living flesh striving to become even larger. You are in the inner sanctum of physical culture, the mecca of bodybuilding, Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, California. The date is August 12th, 1973, and in the center of this temple of muscle stands a man who seems not just an athlete, but a living statue by Michelangelo, carved from granite and tanned skin. This is Arnold Schwarzenegger. He is 26 years old, the reigning Mr. Olympia, and he is absolutely certain that he is the strongest and most perfect being on planet Earth. He curls a barbell, and every contraction of his arm, the circumference of which exceeds the thigh of an average person, draws awestruck whispers from the surrounding lifters. In this world, size matters, and Arnold is the undisputed king, a Gulliver in a land of Lilliputians, whose power is measured in inches and pounds. But at the exact second, Arnold slams the barbell to the floor, savoring the sound of his own greatness. The front door swings open, letting in a beam of bright California sun and a figure whose appearance elicits only condescending smirks from the local inhabitants. Bruce Lee walks in, but forget the image of the invincible warrior you know from the movies. Here, against the backdrop of steroid-fueled giants weighing nearly 260 pounds, Bruce looks like a statistical error. He weighs only 135 pounds. He is dressed in ordinary casual clothes that hide his frame, and standing next to Arnold, he looks like a teenager who accidentally wandered into an adult locker room. You're probably thinking Bruce came to get an autograph or ask for training advice. That would be the logical reaction for someone of his build in a place like this. But here, the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, causing your brain to stall. Bruce Lee does not look at Arnold with admiration. He looks at him with the same cold, analytical interest an engineer might have for a large but obsolete steam engine. Every eye in the room is fixed on this strange guest, and the air hangs heavy with tension mixed with mockery. Arnold, wiping sweat with a towel, looks down at Bruce, ready to crack a joke about how the kid needs to eat more. But Bruce silently walks past the machines, past the racks of light weights, and heads into the most hardcore zone of the gym, where the weights reside that even experienced bodybuilders fear to approach. He stops in front of a dumbbell rack. His arm, thin, wiry, with protruding veins like steel wire, slowly reaches for the object that will become our dagger, the judge and executioner in this unspoken dispute. It is a black, cast iron, monolithic, 100-pound, 45 kilos dumbbell. Look at this piece of metal closely. For Arnold, this is a working weight for a bent-over row, an implement he lifts with his back and legs. But for a man weighing 135 pounds, lifting such a dumbbell with one hand is already a feat. However, Bruce Lee isn't planning on doing a row. He grips the handle, and in that moment, the gym falls into that state of visual silence, where time compresses into a single point. Arnold freezes, expecting the guy to blow out his back and need to be carried to the infirmary. But what happens in the next second violates every known law of biomechanics and anatomy. Bruce Lee doesn't just lift the dumbbell. Slowly, without a jerk, he straightens his arm directly in front of him, holding 100 pounds of pure iron at shoulder level, parallel to the floor. Ask yourself, do you understand what this means? This isn't a trick. It's the physics of leverage. Holding such weight on an outstretched arm while weighing only 135 lbs is like trying to hold a motorcycle engine on the end of a fishing rod. A normal person's tendons should have snapped with a crack. The shoulder joint should have popped out of its socket, and the spine should have crumbled. But Bruce stands. His arm does not shake. His face is calm. There is no grimace of pain, only extreme, superhuman concentration. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who a second ago felt like a god, suddenly feels the ground slipping from beneath his feet. He stares at that straight arm, at that monstrous weight hanging in the air in defiance of gravity, and in his eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, appears fear. The fear of a man who has spent his whole life building a skyscraper, only to realize the foundation was made of sand. He realizes he is not looking at a fitness guy, but a genetic anomaly, a monster whose strength is hidden not in muscle volume, but in the density of matter. And this monster, without a word, and with a single movement of his arm, has just destroyed the entire philosophy of bodybuilding, turning mountains of muscle into useless scenery. To truly appreciate the scale of this quiet confrontation, we need to rewind time exactly 10 minutes and immerse ourselves in the atmosphere that reigned at Gold's Gym before the laws of physics were publicly violated. This gym was not just a place to train, it was a closed ecosystem, a jungle where social status was determined solely by bicep circumference. When Bruce Lee crossed the threshold, he instantly became a foreign body, a grain of sand in a perfectly tuned machine of flesh and iron. The regulars, those giants bloated with protein and ambition, looked at him not as a movie star, but as a mistake. In their world, a 135-pound man could only be a janitor or a pizza delivery boy, never an equal. Arnold Schwarzenegger, spotting Bruce in the mirror, didn't just smile. He felt the need to assert his dominance, to protect his territory from this little intrusion. Surrounded by a retinue of fellow titans, he slowly made his way toward Bruce, every step a demonstration of overwhelming power. Arnold moved in close, his shadow covering Bruce entirely, creating a comical and frightening contrast, a mountain of muscle against a reed. Tension hung in the air, the kind you feel when a crowd expects a newcomer to be put in his place. Arnold, looking down at Bruce from the height of his stature and status, uttered a phrase intended to crush any man's ego. "Hey Bruce, don't you think you've got the wrong door? The girls' gymnastics section is further down the street. You need to eat more meat, son. Otherwise the gym's air conditioning might blow you away." The gym erupted in laughter. It was the laugh of a pack certain of its own invincibility. You probably think Bruce Lee, whose pride was legendary, flared up in rage, that he answered insolence with insolence. That would be the natural reaction of someone who feels diminished. But here, the conveyor belt principle kicks in, making you doubt what you are seeing. Bruce Lee didn't react at all. He didn't blush. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't look away. He looked at Arnold with that calm, almost medical interest with which a virologist examines an interesting bacterium under a microscope. In his eyes, there was no fear of mass. There was the understanding that this mass was merely decoration. Silently, without saying a word in his own defense, Bruce turned and headed for the dumbbell rack. The crowd fell silent, watching him with bewilderment. Where was he going? To the pink dumbbells for a warm-up? To the pull-up bar? But Bruce walked past the light weights. He walked past the medium weights used by regular athletes. He walked toward where the monsters lay, heavy, black, cast-iron implements covered in dust because only a handful of people ever touched them. Arnold stopped smiling. His eyebrows shot up. He saw where this kid was heading, and his brain refused to believe what was happening. "Hey kid, don't be stupid," he shouted, and for the first time his voice carried a note not of mockery, but of genuine concern. "You'll tear your ligaments. These aren't toys." And that's when the Santa Barbara effect flips the situation. Bruce Lee stopped in front of that very 100-pound dumbbell. He didn't warm up. He didn't put on a belt. He didn't ask for a spot. He simply placed his small, wiry palm on the cold handle of the weight. For Arnold, this was a working weight for a row, an exercise involving the entire back. But Bruce was standing sideways to the dumbbell. He was about to do something that contradicted the anatomy of the shoulder joint. He was about to lift a weight equal to nearly 80% of his own body with one arm, and not just lift it, but extend it straight out in front of him. At that moment, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who knew everything about biomechanics, felt a cold prickle of fear not for himself, but because he was about to watch a man break his arm in 3 places. He wanted to rush forward, to stop the madman, but Bruce's calm pinned him to the spot. This wasn't a novice's bravado. It was the confidence of a master who knows a secret beyond even Mr. Olympia's understanding. Bruce gripped the metal, and his forearm, devoid of fat, turned into a map of steel cables, ready to take on a load that should have been impossible. In the moment, Bruce Lee's fingers, like steel claws, closed around the cold, rough knurling of the handle. Time in Gold's Gym didn't just slow down, it coiled into a tight, vibrating spiral of impending catastrophe. Arnold Schwarzenegger, standing 2 feet away, instinctively tensed, bracing himself for the nauseating sound of snapping ligaments and a scream of pain, because his encyclopedic knowledge of anatomy screamed that the shoulder joint of a 135-pound man was physically not designed for such a load at such an angle. You expect to see a jerk? You think Bruce will use momentum, tossing the weight with his whole body to cheat gravity for a second? That would be logical. That would be human. But at this second, Bruce Lee decided to revoke the laws of physics. He didn't lurch. He didn't lean his torso back for counterweight. He began to lift his arm slowly, dauntingly, unnaturally slowly. The black iron left the rack, and that silent lift echoed in Arnold's head louder than a starting pistol, announcing the beginning of the end of his era. Bruce's arm rose with the monotony of a hydraulic press, inch by inch, and as the angle of the lift increased, the load on the deltoid muscle grew exponentially. Ask yourself, how is this possible? How can a thin arm, lacking the hypertrophied volume the locals were so proud of, not break under a weight nearly equal to the athlete himself? The veins on Bruce's forearm and neck bulged, turning into a map of underground rivers, but his face remained absolutely terrifyingly calm. No grimace of effort, no flushing, no gritting of teeth. He wasn't looking at the dumbbell. He was looking directly into Arnold's eyes, and in that gaze was a concentration so icy that Schwarzenegger felt cold sweat run down his back under his tank top. When Bruce's arm reached a horizontal position, perfectly parallel to the floor, that state of visual silence descended upon the gym, absolute and vacuum-sealed. The clatter of iron at the other end of the gym died out. Conversation stopped. Even the music seemed to fade. Dozens of lifters, frozen with their mouths open, stared at this miracle of biomechanics. Bruce Lee held 100 pounds at arm's length, and that arm did not tremble. It was motionless, like a steel beam set in concrete. Seconds began to stretch into hours. 1, 2, 3. Arnold, who knew the price of every pound of iron, felt his brain refusing to process the image. He was witnessing a violation of all the rules upon which he had built his empire. He knew that muscles don't work that way. Something else was at work, something deeper than fiber, deeper than bone. The tendon strength and mental energy he'd only heard about in stories of Shaolin monks, but had never believed in. Bruce continued to hold the weight, and with every passing second, this static hold became an increasingly aggressive act of dominance. He wasn't just holding a dumbbell, he was holding the ego of every man in that gym in his fist. He turned that piece of metal into a mirror in which Arnold saw not his own magnificent reflection, but his vulnerability. Schwarzenegger took off his dark glasses, a gesture of surrender, an attempt to see reality without filters, and in his eyes was not just shock, but sacred horror. He realized that his massive biceps, his shield-like chest muscles, were merely armor, a decoration, while a nuclear reactor was hidden inside this small man. 10 seconds, 15, 20. The dumbbell hung in the air as if glued to an invisible shelf, and Bruce Lee, without breaking eye contact, allowed a faint smile to touch his lips, finally destroying the myth that strength equals volume. In that silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of the surrounding giants, Bruce Lee proved without a single word that muscle size doesn't matter if you don't know how to wire every neuron of your body into a single circuit. a physiology lesson Arnold would remember for the rest of his life. When Bruce Lee began to lower his arm, breaking the static tension that had gripped the room for the last 20 seconds, everyone present, including Arnold Schwarzenegger himself, instinctively prepared for a crash. In the world of bodybuilding, there is an unwritten law. The heavier the weight, the louder it must fall to the floor, announcing to everyone the titanic effort just performed. You expect Bruce, whose muscles should have been burning with the hellfire of lactic acid, to simply open his fingers, let gravity do its work, and collapse onto a bench gasping for air. But here, the Santa Barbara effect occurs, turning a physical exercise into an act of psychological terror. The dumbbell wasn't going down, it was going back. Bruce returned it to the rack along the same perfect, geometrically precise arc he had used to lift it, maintaining total control over every millimeter of movement. The iron touched the rubber mat of the rack almost silently, with a barely audible soft thud, and that quiet sound in the temple of clashing iron felt like a slap in the face to the entire cult of noisy power preached by the local giants. Bruce Lee let go of the handle, and not a single muscle on his face twitched. He didn't rub his shoulder. He didn't wince. He didn't look for approval in the eyes of the crowd. He simply, with a mundane gesture, adjusted the cuff of his shirt as if he had just set down a cup of tea, not a piece of equipment capable of breaking an elephant's leg. Arnold Schwarzenegger, watching this final chord, felt his worldview, built on volume, weight, and protein shakes, begin to crumble into dust. He took a step forward, invading Bruce's personal space, but not with a threat, rather with the sacred, almost childlike curiosity with which a scientist approaches a fallen meteorite. Arnold, a man who knew the anatomy of the human body better than his own name, reached out his massive hand and, without asking permission, gripped Bruce Lee's forearm. What did he expect to feel? A tensed, blood-pumped bicep, trembling flesh? But beneath his fingers, the Austrian Oak discovered something that made his eyes widen in shock behind the dark lenses of his glasses. Bruce's arm was not soft, nor was it merely hard. It felt like a bundle of steel cables wrapped in thin skin. There was none of the water or volume that steroids and pumping provide. There was a dry, terrifying density of material that seemed stronger than bone. Arnold squeezed harder, trying to find a weakness, trying to find the familiar softness of muscle, but he hit resistance that felt like rebar. At that moment, the intellectual orgasm of the story occurred. Schwarzenegger realized that all his life he had been decorating the facade, while this little man had been strengthening the load-bearing structures. "What on earth are your tendons made of?" Arnold exhaled, and there was more respect in that question than in all his Mr. Olympia titles combined. He was no longer looking at Bruce as a fitness guy or an actor, but as a representative of a superior race who had hacked the code of human physiology. The onlookers, those mountains of muscle, held their breath, waiting for an answer, a secret, a diet, a pill, a special exercise. No Bruce Lee, looking up at the giant holding his arm, only smiled that mysterious smile that would later become his trademark. "Concentration, Arnold," he replied quietly. "You pump meat to make it look big. I pump the nervous system to make the body hard. Muscle is just an engine, but without the signal from the brain, it's useless. You are building a tank. I am building a bullet." That answer hit the pride of those present, harder than if Bruce had dropped that 100-pound dumbbell. Our dagger remained lying on the rack, black and motionless, a silent witness to the defeat of bodybuilding in the face of functional strength. At that second, Arnold let go of Bruce's arm, and an expression of deep reflection appeared on his face. He realized that the volume he had been chasing was an illusion of strength, and that true power is hidden where it cannot be seen, in the ligaments, in the tendons, in the brain's ability to mobilize 100% of the fibers in a single second. Bruce Lee didn't just lift a weight. He raised the bar of understanding human potential to a height that Hollywood's puffed-up muscles couldn't reach even with a jump. When the glass door of Gold's Gym closed behind Bruce Lee, cutting him off from the world of iron and steroids, he left behind not just the smell of sweat, but a heavy, viscous residue of cognitive dissonance that washed over everyone present like a tsunami. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the future Terminator and icon of the century, remained standing by the dumbbell rack. His posture no longer held the relaxed, indestructible confidence of a king with which he had met his little guest 10 minutes earlier. He stared at that black 100-pound dumbbell, our narrative dagger, which now rested peacefully on the rubber mat. To him, that piece of metal seemed not like sports equipment, but like an alien artifact that had just violated all the known laws of the universe. You probably think Arnold shrugged, cracked a joke, and went back to his sets, forgetting about the small Chinese man? That would be logical for a man with his ego and status. But here, the final, most powerful Santa Barbara effect kicks in, shattering the stereotype of the dumb meathead. Arnold didn't go back to his workout. He packed his things and left. He didn't lift another pound of iron that day because he suddenly realized his training was incomplete, superficial, decorative. Later, in private conversations, Schwarzenegger would make an admission worth more than any gold. Bruce Lee is the only man whose body I do not understand. I build mass to impress. He built density to kill. Next to him, I felt like a balloon that could be popped with a single needle. This admission is not weakness. It is the wisdom of a titan who saw the limits of his own power and dared to look beyond them. That day at Venice Beach was not just a strength contest. It was a head-on collision of two philosophies, two religions of the body that cannot coexist in the same reality. On one side, the cult of aesthetics, where muscle is a facade, an architectural extravagance created for admiration, the podium, and the camera. On the other, the cult of function, where the body is a weapon with not an ounce of extra weight, only raw, lethal efficiency hidden under the skin. Bruce Lee didn't just perform a trick with a dumbbell. He asked a question that still echoes in every fitness club in the world. Why do you want strength if you don't know how to control it at a micro level? He proved that being big doesn't mean being strong, and being shredded doesn't mean being fast or dangerous. That dumbbell he held at arm's length became an eternal reproach to the entire bodybuilding industry, a reminder that true power is invisible to the eye. It is hidden in the impulses of the nervous system, in that very concentration the dragon spoke of, which cannot be pumped up with protein. And now, as we stand among the ruins of this historic debate, looking at the black and white photos of two legends, I want to pass this metaphorical dumbbell into your hands. We live in the age of Instagram and TikTok, where appearance has become the primary currency, where we judge form by bicep size and six-pack abs, forgetting the essence. But the story of the meeting between Bruce Lee and Arnold forces us to stop and ask ourselves, what are we actually building with our lives? Whom will you choose as your ideal in this harsh, competitive world? Do you want to be the aesthete, like Arnold, whose body commands envy on the beach and awe on the stage, but which requires fuel and maintenance like an expensive, temperamental limousine? Or will you choose the path of function, like Bruce, whose strength is invisible but absolute, whose body is not a pretty picture, but a universal survival tool capable of the impossible in a critical second? Which side are you on in this eternal war of form versus substance? The side of the shining armor that might be empty inside, or the side of the lethal blade hidden beneath simple clothes? Write one word in the comments: aesthetics or function. I'll be waiting for your choice, because it is that choice that defines what you wake up for in the morning. To look strong in the mirror, or to be strong in reality, when the weight of the world rests on your outstretched arm.